Our second lesson this morning comes from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 25, verses 14 through 30. For it is as if a man, going on a journey, summoned his slaves and entrusted his property to them. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away. The one who had received the 5 talents went off at once and traded with them and made 5 more talents. In the same way, the one who had received the 2 talents made 2 more talents. But the one who had received the 1 talent went off and dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those slaves came and settled accounts with them. Then the one who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 more talents, saying, Master, you handed over to me 5 talents. See, I have made 5 more talents. His master said to him, Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You've been trustworthy in a few things. I'll put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. And the one with 2 talents also came forward, saying, Master, you handed over to me 2 talents. See, I have made 2 more talents. His master said to him, Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You've been trustworthy in a few things. I'll put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. Then the one who had received the 1 talent also came forward, saying, Master, I knew that you were a harsh man, reaping where you did not sow and gathering where you did not scatter seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here, you have what is yours. But his master replied, You wicked and lazy slave. You knew, did you, that I reap where I did not sow and gather where I did not scatter? Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and on my return I would have received what was my own with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to the one with the 10 talents. For to all those who have, more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken away. As for this worthless slave, throw him into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Do you believe in luck? If you actually do think that luck is a thing, then you probably see it as a thing over which you have no control. Most of us view luck as a finite entity that can appear out of nowhere and eventually run out. Well, Dr. Richard Wiseman would disagree. He has spent years studying so-called lucky people, and his research has shown that luck isn't something that comes out of the blue. Luck is something any one of us can actually cultivate, even increase. Long before Dr. Wiseman had published his research, my friend Catherine seemed to have mastered this skill of being lucky. No matter the situation, everything always just seemed to fall into place for her. I'm sure you've known someone like that. Now in her 40s, she has a happy marriage, 4 beautiful children, financial resources. Plus, she just happens to be one of the nicest people I know, warm and generous, full of cheerful enthusiasm. Well, last winter, Catherine shared the news with her large network of family and friends that after months of unexplained illness, she had been diagnosed with cancer, terminal cancer. After emergency surgery, Catherine embarked on a difficult 6-month regime of chemotherapy. It seemed that Catherine's luck had finally run out. Today's parable doesn't really sound like it has much to do with luck, except that it talks about talent. And talent is something most of us view in the same way we view luck. We think of it as something given to us, but something over which we really don't have much control. Either we have a particular talent or we don't. But as with luck, talent turns out to be a more complicated concept than that. Apart from a handful of true prodigies, people who excel in their fields, whether they're artists, athletes, or other top-notch professionals, don't necessarily have a larger share of talent than the rest of us. Instead, their success is at least partially attributed to hours and hours of practice. But the kind of talent Jesus is talking about here has nothing to do with particular gifts or skills. Back then, the word talent referred to something tangible, a very large sum of money. It was about 20 years' worth of wages. A talent was as much money as most people back then hoped to see in their entire lifetime. So it really doesn't matter that in this parable, one slave got 5 talents and one got 2 and one only got 1. The point is the master gave each slave the gift of a lifetime. Whether they got 1 or 2 or 5, they were set for life. After my friend was diagnosed with cancer, her seemingly charmed life was just as charmed as before. When her hair came out from the chemo, she fulfilled her dream of becoming a blonde by buying a blonde wig. She talked about how nice it was to feel a warm summer breeze or the water from the shower on her bald head. Before her diagnosis, she'd bought tickets to 2 sold-out concerts. She always had a knack for getting the tickets to the concerts she wanted. One was a Taylor Swift concert she planned to take her daughters to, and the other was a U2 concert in New York City. Instead of giving away the tickets because she didn't feel well enough to go, she worked her connections, and at both concerts, her nosebleed seats were exchanged for coveted spots on the floor right in front of the stage. Taylor Swift even came over between sets and gave her and her daughters a hug, creating a memory for a lifetime. After the master in this parable left the slaves with their gifts, they had to decide just what to do with what they'd been given, no matter whether they'd been given 5 talents or 1. Would they invest it in ways that would increase it, or follow the common practice of the day and secure it by burying it underground? We don't necessarily understand why the servants make the choices they do until the master returns and calls for his slaves to account for what they'd been given. When it comes to this 3rd slave, we hear this: "Master, I knew you were a harsh man, reaping where you did not sow and gathering where you did not scatter seed, so I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground." In the end, this slave gets exactly the master he expected: harsh, angry, and judgmental. If we have convinced ourselves that the God we worship is like the master described by the 3rd slave here, then most of us will indeed be paralyzed with fear and anxiety when it comes to using the gifts God has given us, whether these gifts are skills or material resources. But if we see God as a generous giver who wants nothing more than for us to spend our gifts with shrewdness and compassion, just imagine what we might be able to do for our community and our world. This morning, we woke up again to the news that ISIS claims to have beheaded another aid worker, this time an American named Peter Kasich, who served our country as an Army Ranger in Iraq and then went to help the people of Syria. Peter once told reporters that he went there because that part of the world suffers so deeply from an absence of hope. We each get one life, and that's it, he said. We get one shot at this, and we don't get any do-overs. The way I saw it, I didn't have a choice. This is what I was put here to do. I guess I'm just a hopeless romantic. I'm an idealist, and I believe in hopeless causes. Another idealist who believes in hopeless causes is Lisa Hensley. She works with the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease and has been performing research on Ebola in American labs for the last 15 years. Last summer, she went to Liberia to work with her colleagues there, testing blood samples for Ebola so that they can help doctors in Liberia identify the spread of the disease. Like the health workers on the front lines of the battle against this cruel and deadly virus, Hensley is at risk every day when she handles contaminated blood. While they work, she and her colleagues must wear those pressurized personal protective equipment, those suits that look like space suits, and their risk for exposure is very high. But still, Hensley does everything she can to help stop the spread of this disease and save lives. If you are walking by a lake and someone is drowning, she says, you can't not try to save them. People here are drowning in Ebola. Lisa Hensley has a 9-year-old son. She is a single mom. So when she left to go to Liberia, she had to leave her son in the care of her parents. But she says, if we don't help, what kind of message are we sending to our children? Our children are going to inherit these problems, and people are dying. Part of the responsibility of a parent is to teach our children how to be responsible. We have to set the example for our staff, our families, and the patients in Africa. I read about people like Lisa Hensley and Peter Kassig, and I want to know, how does a person make that kind of choice? How do people risk everything for others they don't know halfway around the world? What compels someone to use their life, to risk their life for such a noble cause? For as long as today's parable has been told, people who've heard it and tried to understand it have debated whether the master in this parable represents God. Is God really such a harsh master that those of us who play it safe get consigned to the outer darkness where there is weeping and gnashing of teeth? As far as I'm concerned, this is the wrong question to ask when it comes to this passage. After all, parables are never meant to be taken literally. They're meant to make us ask questions, to push us deeper, to try to understand our faith and our relationship with God and with one another. This parable reminds us that how we live and what we do with the life God has given us matters. It matters to God, it matters to the world, and it should matter to us, not because we'll be punished if we don't use it correctly, but because God gave us this gift out of love, and God calls us to use this gift, to live our lives in service to love. A well-known theologian once confessed that he was plagued many nights by a terrible dream. He dreamed he was traveling in some distant city where he ran into someone with whom he had gone to high school. In this nightmare, the person would say, "Henry, Henry, haven't seen you in years. What have you done with your life?" This question always felt like judgment. He'd done some good things in his life, but there had also been some troubles and some struggles. And when the old schoolmate in the dream would say, "What have you done with your life?" Henry wouldn't know what to say, how to account for his life. Then one night he had another dream. He dreamed he died and went to heaven. He was waiting outside the throne room of God, waiting to stand before his Maker, and he shivered with fear. He just knew that God would be surrounded by fire and smoke and would speak in a deep voice saying, "Henry, Henry, what have you done with your life?" But then in the dream, when the door to God's throne room opened, the room was filled with light. From the room, he could hear God speaking to him in a gentle voice, saying, "Henry, it's so good to see you. I hear you had a rough trip, but I'd love to see your slides. War, terrorists, climate change, Ebola, cancer, debt. There are simply no shortages of crises in the world and in our personal lives to remind us that life is achingly, undeniably precious. These things also teach us that what matters most is not the things that happen to us that are outside our control. What matters is how we respond to the unexpected challenges we face. But we don't need to wait for tragedy to strike to learn the value of what God has given us and to dig it up from where we have buried it deep in the ground. What we do with our lives matters to us, to others, to God, who has given us the ultimate example of how to spend everything we have in the service of love. God has given you the gift of a lifetime, and God cares how you use it. If you are spending it well in the service of love, well done. Keep up the hard work. And if you have buried that gift away, know that it is never too late to dig it up from the ground, to brush off the dirt, and to spend it all in ways that reveal to the world the invaluable and desperately needed love of God. Amen.